Arthur Sloane had never been chased by an alien woman before, but he liked to think he'd handle it with more dignity than dropping his wrench and falling into a recycling hatch. Unfortunately, that was exactly what happened 37 seconds before she said the words that would change his week, month, and species self-identification status. "Don't move, human. I finally found you." The words sliced through the humming static of the defunct orbital station, sharp as gravity knives and somehow warmer than they had any right to be. Arthur froze, one leg still hanging awkwardly from the hatch as the panel tried to close on his ankle. He turned slowly, very slowly, because experience had taught him that voices like that were either followed by a plasma rifle or a very committed sales pitch. She was standing 5 feet away, boots silently pressed into the dusty metal floor, haloed by the sickly green glow of the station's emergency lights. Her hair shimmered like liquid graphite. Her eyes were the kind of silver that suggested they could see through walls, lies, and maybe even taxes. And her ears, long, slender, and curved backward like organic antennae, twitched slightly as she studied him. Arthur blinked. Then, just to test if he was dreaming, he slapped himself. "Ow," he muttered. "Confirmed. Your pain receptors are functional," she said, stepping closer. "That simplifies things." "Oh, good. We're simplifying now," Arthur said, still caught between fascination and sheer instinctive panic. "Can I ask who you are before you stab me? Or do we skip to the part where I scream and ruin my reputation with the maintenance bots?" She tilted her head. "You don't recognize me." "I don't recognize half my own contacts without coffee," Arthur said. "You're probably going to need to narrow it down." Her brows furrowed. "I am Vela of the Alaran. I have crossed 13 systems, bartered with the memory brokers of Ashen, and solved the riddle of Renelnai just to locate your biometric echo signature." "Wow," Arthur said. "That sounds extremely complicated. Are you sure I'm not just some guy who's good at calibrating vending machines?" Vela's expression didn't change, but one ear flicked backward, which Arthur took as either irritation or a low-level transmission error. "You are the human known as Arthur Sloane, genetic designation 9HO77B. "I prefer Arthur," he said, "and I have no idea what any of that means. Do you?" She blinked. "Not entirely, but my ship assures me it's important." "Oh, you've got a ship that gives you cryptic advice? That's cute. Mine mostly just yells at me about coolant pressure and refuses to play any music with harmonicas." Vela stepped even closer. "You carry something. Not visible, not conscious, but resonant." Arthur backed up into a wall panel that hissed and spat out a misfiled ration bar. "You're starting to sound like my ex," he said, although she didn't have ears that looked like designer boomerangs. "I'm here to protect you," she said, too seriously for someone who had just threatened him into paralysis. "Because others will come. They already have." Arthur looked around the corridor. "You mean, like, right now? Because I left my plasma spanner back at Dock 4, and the only weapon I've got is an expired burrito in my tool pouch." She raised her hand. A flicker of blue light danced across her fingers. Not a weapon, not exactly. More like a projection. It shimmered into the air between them. A shape, not a map, not a symbol. A pulse, like a heartbeat captured in three-dimensional waveform, cycling infinitely. "That," she said, nodding toward the display, "that is inside you." Arthur stared. "Okay, now you're really sounding like my ex." "You were encoded with it generations ago," Vela said. "By treaty, by design, and now by fate, it's active again. Let me get this straight. I'm some kind of ancient USB stick?" "Crude," she said, "but accurate." The panel next to them hissed again, then erupted in sparks. "I hate this place," Arthur muttered. "Can we maybe continue this conversation somewhere with fewer, spontaneously combusting walls?" "I have a ship." "Of course you do." She turned without another word and walked back down the corridor, assuming he'd follow. Arthur hesitated, checked his burrito for moral support, then sighed and trotted after her. Her ship was parked outside the station in what should have been a no-landing zone, which probably explained the deep, steaming gouge in the deck plating. It looked like an obsidian seashell crossbred with a jellyfish and a minor god. Arthur didn't know much about Alaran design, but he was fairly sure it wasn't supposed to hum the bass line to blue suede shoes. As he stepped aboard, the ship's interior adjusted to his presence, literally. The walls shifted from shimmering crystal to dull steel and back again, trying to guess his aesthetic preferences. "Could we not with the mood lighting?" he muttered. "It's like being swallowed by a nightclub." "Welcome aboard the Second Thought," Vela said. The ship snorted. "Ignore it," she added. "It has opinions." Arthur looked around. "So, what now?" "We run." "From who?" "From the Concordiat." "Ah, yes, that definitely clears things up," Arthur said. "And what do they want?" She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the truth against the weight of his limited attention span. "They want to erase you," she said. Arthur raised a hand. "Quick question. Is that a metaphor or—" "No." "Great," he said. "Let's get erased later. First, can I get a sandwich?" The Second Thought did not like Arthur. It didn't try to hide it. Every door hissed slightly slower when he walked through. The lights dimmed whenever he spoke, and the interface, an amorphous patch of shifting color and sarcastic chimes, developed what could only be described as a passive-aggressive pulse every time Arthur touched anything. "You're certain this ship isn't haunted?" Arthur asked, peering into what he hoped was the galley and not the engine's digestive tract. "It's calibrated to mirror emotional frequencies," Vela said without looking up. "It might be haunted by your personality." "That's rich coming from someone who kidnapped me because my chromosomes allegedly vibrate to the key of galactic peace." Vela didn't respond. She was hunched over the nav console, ears twitching every few seconds like they were tuning to a frequency he couldn't hear. Arthur had learned not to take this personally. Ilaran biology was strange. One of her ears apparently picked up light waves, while the other interpreted gravitational irregularities. He wasn't sure what either had to say about her current mood, but judging by the speed at which she was typing, it wasn't relaxed. Arthur poked at a food synthesizer that offered either protein gel surprise or regret smoothie. "Does the surprise refer to the protein or the consequences?" he muttered. "The surprise is that it's technically edible," the ship's voice chimed. It sounded like it had been programmed by a smug theater major. "Great. A ship with culinary sarcasm. Can you make toast?" "Only if you'd like to talk about your unresolved parental issues while it burns." Arthur made a noise halfway between a sigh and a groan and selected the regret smoothie. It came out purple and vibrating slightly. Vela turned around and looked at him as if trying to assess whether he was the same species. "Do you have any idea what's happening?" Arthur sipped the smoothie, grimaced, and said, "I think this might be made of old batteries and grief." "Also, no, I'm completely lost." She exhaled. Not quite a sigh, not quite a breath. A sound shaped like a verdict. "There is a signal nested in your DNA, a sequence that functions like a lock and a beacon. It was placed there long before your birth, possibly before your species developed the wheel." Arthur set the smoothie down. It was starting to develop eyes. "So I'm... what? A walking key? A space USB drive? You are a variable in an equation designed to prevent universal collapse. I flunked algebra twice." Vela moved closer. She held out a small prism that glowed blue as she passed it near his arm. The light intensified. Patterns spun through the air, geometric and musical, as if sacred math was trying to break into interpretive dance. "There," she said softly. "That's the harmonic code. It's responding to proximity. That means others can track it too." Arthur raised a finger. "About that, you mentioned someone wants to erase me. Can we circle back to that horrifying detail?" Vela nodded. "The Concordiat enforces stability. They view the anchor pulse as destabilizing. Too old, too powerful, too unpredictable. They don't want it awakened, so anyone carrying the key is expendable." "Well, that's just dandy," Arthur said. "Do they send a stern letter or go straight to vaporization?" "Depends on their mood. Lately, it's been more kinetic." As if summoned, the ship's console chimed. "Incoming object. Trajectory, unfriendly. Estimated arrival, 90 seconds. Arthur's head whipped around. "That better be a metaphor." "No," the ship said, "but I can speak in metaphors if that'll help. Shall I compare it to the unrelenting march of time? Vela was already at the controls. Strap in. Arthur looked for a seat with minimal spikes, sharp corners, or existential dread, and settled into one near the rear. The harness closed around him like a hug from someone who wanted to file a lawsuit afterward. Outside, space warped. The pursuing object, a Concordiat Hunter drone shaped like a spiked jellyfish, launched a wave of tachyon mines ahead of itself. The second thought didn't so much dodge as reconsider its position in space. Arthur's stomach briefly filed for independence. The ship spun. Gravity turned traitor. Arthur's smoothie hit the ceiling and didn't come down. Vela flicked a series of controls, her long fingers dancing like she was playing an angry, invisible harp. A beam of compressed dark light shot from the ship's tail, disrupting the drone's sensors. It staggered, then recovered. Another pulse followed. This one missed. "Can't we reason with them?" Arthur yelled. "They don't negotiate with anomalies," Vela replied. "I'm not an anomaly. I'm barely qualified to fix a coffee machine." Exactly. The drone fired a net of quantum filaments, which extended into space like threads of frozen lightning. The second thought twisted, banked, and dove. One filament grazed the hull and caused the lights to flicker. Arthur felt a sharp jolt behind his eyes, as if someone had knocked politely on his brainstem. "Ship?" Vela called out. "Shields at 62%, it replied. Mood, deeply annoyed. "I feel that," Arthur muttered. The ship looped under an asteroid field made entirely of fossilized thoughts. Arthur didn't ask, and burst into a pocket of unshielded ion radiation. The drone followed, but slower. "Now," Vela said. She pressed her palm to a panel that responded only to a Lauren biosignature. A surge of energy built behind them. Arthur clenched every part of his body that could clench. The ship jumped, not into hyperspace, not through a wormhole, into side time. For a moment, Arthur saw versions of himself in other timelines. A bald baker with 12 arms, a pirate in love with a jellyfish, a botanist with a pet volcano. Then it passed. They emerged into quiet. Stars hummed like old records. The drone was gone. Arthur exhaled. "That was horrible," he said. "We'll have to do it again," Vela said. Arthur slumped. "Great. Can we at least stop somewhere for actual food? I think that smoothie gave me a second tongue." "Fine," Vela said, "but we don't have long. The pulse is waking." "And that's bad?" "It's everything," she said. Arthur blinked. "Right, totally comforting." Arthur was dreaming of carpet. Not just any carpet, but the warm, soft kind his grandmother used to install in a fit of rebellion against modern, minimalist flooring. In his dream, he was face down on it, arms stretched out like a chalk outline, mumbling something about the ethics of carpet-based governance. Then the ship hit turbulence. The dream carpet dissolved into a spinning corridor and a very real wall panel that introduced itself to Arthur's face with all the gentleness of a bureaucrat with a grudge. He groaned, rolled over, and was immediately greeted by a voice that sounded both amused and completely done with his existence. "You drooled on my interface," or said the second thought. "Good morning to you too," Arthur mumbled, wiping his face and squinting at the fluctuating light patterns above him. "Or whatever time it is when you're lost in emotionally unstable subspace." "It's always Tuesday somewhere," the ship replied. "Vela would like you conscious and wearing pants, preferably in that order." Arthur blinked. "Why? Are we being chased again? Or is this just a new form of morning abuse?" "Neither," came Vela's voice from the intercom. "We're landing." That woke him up faster than fear of coffee shortages. He stumbled toward the bridge, pulling on his boots and shirt in the process, nearly tripping over a maintenance drone that seemed personally offended by his entire existence. When he arrived, Vela was at the helm, eyes fixed on the swirling mass outside the viewport. "What is that?" he asked. "Raven's Hollow, a moon orbiting the collapsed core of the ancient star Vurshen. It changes shape based on the emotional signatures of those who land there." Arthur blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say the moon is emotionally reactive?" "Yes." "Cool, cool, cool. And whose idea was it to land here? Just so I know which of us to haunt when this inevitably goes wrong." "I need to retrieve something from the ruins," she said. "A signal booster keyed to the original anchor frequency. Without it, The pulse might not recognize your genetic imprint. So you need a galactic tuning fork and thought, hey, let's visit the moon that throws tantrums based on bad vibes? It's the only place it's still intact, Vela said. And besides, it's mostly stable. Unless you lie. Lie, Arthur said. The terrain reacts to unspoken truths. If you try to hide something, the hollow knows. Arthur sat down. You're sure it's not just a therapy planet in disguise? No, Vela said, but wear your seatbelt. They descended through dense clouds that flickered with static lightning. The ship hummed nervously as it entered the atmosphere. The landing zone appeared, at first a serene valley with glassy hills and trees that looked like frozen smoke. Then Arthur thought about an embarrassing childhood incident involving cheese and a failed science fair, and the entire landscape convulsed. A nearby hill turned into a slump of melting chairs. Okay, he said. It's reading me. That's great. Totally fine. You'll adjust, Vela said, hopping down the ramp once they touched ground. Arthur followed, the ground beneath his feet making faint squishy noises like it was trying not to judge him out loud. They walked toward a ruined tower that looked more dreamed than built. Vela scanned it with a handheld device shaped like a dragonfly caught in mid-panic. Arthur glanced around. The trees were humming. One of them whispered his name in a tone that made him feel like he owed it money. This place is alive, he muttered. It's an echo field, she replied, memories layered in geological strata. You'll be fine as long as you don't think about... He tripped over a rock shaped like his 8th grade math teacher's nose. Too late. Inside the tower, the temperature dropped. The walls weren't made of stone or metal but pages. Layers of overlapping script in a language Arthur didn't recognize, but somehow understood just enough to get a headache. I'm guessing we're not supposed to touch anything, he asked. Correct. Especially not the inscriptions. Some of them are still active. Arthur kept his hands to himself, mostly, except for a strange orb that looked exactly like the doorknob from his old apartment on Luna Station. When he touched it, the entire room rippled like a disturbed pond. A shadow formed in the corner. It looked like Arthur, but taller, better posture, slightly smug. Okay, nope, Arthur said. Nope, nope, nope. Don't engage it, Vela warned, not looking up. How does it know about my posture? It's you, or rather, a version of you. This place doesn't just react, it reflects. You must focus. Focus on what? On who you are. Arthur stared at his smug doppelganger. It raised an eyebrow at him in the exact way Arthur always hated when people raised eyebrows at him. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and thought of something grounding. His old cat, Whiskertron, who once dragged a half-eaten toaster across the living room like it was prey. The image steadied him. The shadow dissolved. Vela was watching him now, not with her usual irritation, but something quieter. He nodded as if he'd done it on purpose. She pulled the booster from a crystalline pedestal at the back of the room. It was a strange device, humming faintly, shaped like a tuning fork designed by a romantic. She turned to leave, but the tower wasn't done with them. The exit was gone, replaced by a hallway they hadn't seen. Is that new? Arthur asked. Yes, Vela said. It wants us to go deeper. Well, that's never a bad sign, Arthur muttered. They followed the hallway. The walls grew narrower. The lights dimmed. Arthur heard whispers again, this time repeating a phrase in a loop. Don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. What does it want? He whispered. Resolution. That's vague and deeply inconvenient. The hall opened into a chamber with a glowing pool in the center. Reflected in the pool were not their faces, but scenes. Arthur's first memory, Vela's last goodbye. Moments wrapped in regret and longing, playing on repeat. It's a threshold, she said softly. We have to leave something behind. Arthur looked at her. What are you leaving? Fear, he nodded. I'll leave sarcasm. The ship's voice crackled through a distant panel. Liar. Arthur sighed. Fine. I'll leave guilt. He stepped toward the pool. It glowed brighter, warmer, then flickered, and the chamber blinked out. They were back on the surface. Arthur looked around. Did that actually happen? Yes. I'm never going to understand this moon. No, she said, but you survived it. Barely. He turned to Vela. She was smiling just a little. Next stop, he asked. She held up the booster. The archive nexus. And after that? Her ears twitched. After that, we see if the galaxy's ready for you. Arthur frowned. What if I'm not ready for it? Too late, she said. And then the moon mercifully stayed quiet. Arthur had questions. Most of them started with why, ended with me, and somewhere in the middle included phrases like galactic cipher, emotional moons, an unwilling genetic key. But for the past 2 hours, he'd been holding back in favor of survival, which seemed like a reasonable trade. Now, standing on the bridge of the second thought with a half-melted protein bar in one hand and an ancient signal booster vibrating softly in the other, he decided it was time. Can we just go back to the part where I'm apparently vital to the structural coherence of reality? He said, because I feel like someone somewhere made a terrible clerical error. Vela, leaning over the console, didn't look up. The pulse doesn't make errors. It seeks resonance. Right, and I'm what? A tuning fork with anxiety? Something like that, she said, pressing her palm against the navigation disc. The ship adjusted its trajectory with a soft, judgmental hum. Arthur paced. This anchor pulse, what happens if it wakes up and doesn't like me? Then it doesn't activate. The sequence fails. That sounds fine. Let's do that. Failing sounds lovely. If the sequence fails, Vela said, finally looking at him, the galactic truce collapses, hundreds of systems fall into war, and several planets may develop sentient tax systems. Arthur stared. You're making that last one up. I really wish I were. The console beeped. Approaching the archive nexus, the ship announced. Prepare to be unimpressed. It hasn't had visitors since time forgot to check in. Through the viewport, a structure emerged, floating in orbit around a dying red dwarf. The nexus didn't look like a library. It looked like a migraine sculpted from collapsing geometry. Shapes folded in on themselves. Passages defied physics, and the docking bay appeared and disappeared depending on where you stood. Arthur frowned. I think it just winked at me. Try not to take it personally, Vela said. It once insulted my haircut in 7 languages. They docked with only minor spatial interference, and one alarming moment where Arthur briefly existed in 12 locations simultaneously. The ship's AI declared that his molecules were now significantly more relatable. Inside the archive, the air felt optional, not absent, just politely indifferent to breathing. The walls shimmered with sentient ink, sentences rewriting themselves in real time. A corridor twisted into view, accompanied by a small floating orb, with a face etched in permanent bureaucratic exasperation. Welcome, it said. State your purpose, designation, and deepest insecurity. Hello, Arthur replied. I'm Arthur. I'm here to not destroy the galaxy, and I sometimes lie about reading the terms and conditions. Accepted, the orb said. Follow me. Vela nodded. Stay close. The archive tends to wander. Wait, it wanders? Not the building, the concept of it. Arthur opened his mouth, closed it, and kept walking. They passed chambers that echoed thoughts instead of sound. One room screamed Arthur's internal monologue back at him until he apologized to a potted plant. Another projected alternate versions of history based on minor decisions, including a deeply unsettling one where he invented toaster-based religion. Finally, they reached a chamber lined with mirrors made of memory. In the center, a pedestal waited, and atop it, a spherical core. That's the Nexus heart, Vela said. Place your hand on it. Why is it glowing like it knows my browsing history? It's reacting to your proximity. Arthur stepped forward. The closer he got, the louder his heartbeat felt. He looked at Vela. You sure about this? No, she said, but it's the only way. He reached out. The moment his fingers touched the sphere, the room shattered quietly, without glass or noise. Just change. Light folded inward. Time yawned. And suddenly he stood in a vast silent field under a sky of flickering stars. Alone. A voice, not Vela's, spoke inside his head. You carry the thread. Do you understand the burden? Nope, Arthur said aloud. But I've got snacks. The stars above shifted into patterns. Memories. Echoes. Wars, peace. Faces he didn't know but somehow recognized. A woman who looked like Vela, but older. A man with his eyes but not his name. A child born under twin suns holding a silver pendant shaped like a pulse wave. "You are the lock," the voice said, "and the key." "That's really inefficient," Arthur muttered. "But go on. You must choose to awaken the anchor. Will you?" Arthur hesitated. "Do I get to read the manual first?" Silence. Then slowly the sky turned into a single pulse of light. He reached for it. No logic, just instinct. His hand closed around it. The vision ended. He was back in the archive. Vela stood across from him, expression unreadable. "You were gone for 3 seconds," she said. "It felt longer," he replied. "Also, the anchor is awake now." The orb from earlier floated into view. "Congratulations. You've successfully destabilized 16 political factions. Please exit calmly." Vela blinked. "They felt it?" "All of them," the orb replied. "Brace for diplomatic outrage and at least one interpretive war dance." Arthur turned to Vela. "So, we're fugitives now?" "Technically," she said. "Symbolic threats to institutional control." "Cool," Arthur said. "Do symbolic threats get dental?" The orb glowed red. "Security approaching. I recommend evasive banter and rapid departure." They sprinted back to the docking bay as parts of the archive reconfigured into vaguely accusatory hallways. The second thought was ready, its ramp open like an impatient tongue. Arthur dove inside. "Let's go before this building turns into a metaphor for poor life choices." The ship detached. The archive disappeared behind them in a blink. Vela slumped into her seat. "You did it," she said. "You woke the anchor." "Great," Arthur said, strapping in. "Now what?" The ship answered. "Now," it said, "you deal with the consequences." Arthur was having trouble remembering how his week started. He was pretty sure it involved a stuck vending machine, a bruised knee, and a conversation with a wrench about the meaning of life. Now he was staring down a diplomatic standoff in the orbit of a gas giant shaped like a disapproving parent. Life had escalated. The second thought hovered quietly in a neutral zone, surrounded by a dozen ships from at least 6 species, each one broadcasting increasingly passive-aggressive communiques about containment, preservation of galactic order, and one memo that simply read, "We told you not to touch it." Arthur sat at the table in the ship's central chamber, twirling a spoon between his fingers and looking entirely unimpressive. "I don't think I'm cut out for this," he said. "I'm just a guy who once got electrocuted by a toaster and apologized to it." Vela didn't look up from the holographic display of the diplomatic grid. "You've awakened a signal dormant since the days of the Alaran Treaty. You carry a resonance code that stabilizes interspecies consciousness. You're more than just a guy." Arthur nodded. "Right. And you're more than a long-eared dream alien with emotionally suppressed cheekbones." "I don't know what that means," Vela said. "But thank you." The ship interjected. "They're calling for a summit. All representatives are demanding to meet the anomaly." Arthur slouched. "Do I need to wear pants for this?" "Yes," Vela and the ship said in unison. In the neutral chamber aboard the Concordiat's diplomatic cruiser, an opulent, floating geometry that smelled faintly of ozone and roasted ego, Arthur faced them. Ambassadors, scientists, warriors, and at least one entity that communicated exclusively through scent-based math. Each demanded answers. Each looked at him like a glitch in the grand code. He cleared his throat. Hi, I'm Arthur, full-time mechanic, part-time chosen one, big fan of peace, also sandwiches." Silence. "I didn't ask for any of this, but I've seen what the anchor pulse can do. It's not a weapon. It's a feeling, a broadcast, a reminder that existence isn't about control or domination. It's about connection." A small ambassador made entirely of transparent spheres let out a gurgle that translated to, "Define connection." Arthur shrugged. "You ever share a quiet moment with someone who makes your chaos feel like music?" The ambassador blinked. "No." "Well, you're missing out." The Alaran delegate stepped forward. Vela's superior, regal, detached, slightly judgy. You have altered a sacred balance. Recklessly. Arthur straightened. Maybe, but maybe the balance needed a shake. More silence. Then the ambassador made of shifting light stood. The pulse resonates, even now, across channels we long thought lost. Another spoke. We're dreaming again. Together. A pause, then, incredibly, the scent-based math being released a pheromone cocktail that translated roughly to, maybe we were wrong. They left the chamber not in chains, but in silence. Back on the ship, Arthur collapsed into a chair. Did I just speech the galaxy into calm? You appealed to their sentience, Vela said, and their guilt. Mostly guilt, the ship added, but you also looked extremely non-threatening. Arthur exhaled. So what now? Do I get a medal? A job? A paid vacation to a planet that doesn't judge my thoughts? Vela smiled. A real one this time. Soft and tired. We disappear. Arthur blinked. Wait, what? The galaxy believes you're a symbol now, that you exist beyond systems. If you stay, you'll be dissected metaphorically, and possibly literally. Arthur considered. Okay, new question. Where do we disappear to? The ship purred. I hear there's a planet made entirely of floating hot springs and democratic fungi. Sold. They slipped away before sunrise. No grand farewell, no fanfare. Just a ship, a human, and an alien woman with ears like celestial parentheses vanishing into starlight. Later, much later, the stories would begin. They'd say the human was a myth, a cipher made flesh, a wanderer who spoke truths with a crooked smile. Some would believe he ascended. Others would claim he became pure light. A few would say he opened a sandwich shop in a pocket dimension and lived happily ever after. They'd all be wrong. Arthur Sloane just kept flying, arguing with a sentient ship, laughing with a woman who once threatened to erase him, eating suspicious protein bars, getting better bit by bit at being part of something bigger. And sometimes, late at night, when the stars aligned just so, he'd whisper, "Don't move, human." I finally found me. Jace Marin had survived orbital re-entry with one wing offline, a Venusian interrogation involving scented neural gas, and a 3-month internship in the Department of Interstellar Sanitation. None of that prepared him for the moment when an alien woman proposed marriage in the middle of a diplomatic brunch. He was halfway through a crumbly protein scone, nodding at some nonsense Admiral Takashi was spouting about mining rights near the Erethian borders, when a Lara Ven leaned forward across the chrome conference table and said quite plainly, I am initiating the proposal protocol. Will you consent to formal soul bonding under Clause 47B? Jace blinked. I'm sorry, did you say soul bonding? Is that a metaphor, or? I would like to marry you, Corporal Marin, she clarified, her voice musical and serene, like a harp played by someone who had never met shame. Clause 47B covers permanent biocognitive interlinking, shared property rights, and optional reproductive negotiations. Takashi dropped his scone. Someone near the back of the room actually gasped, which was impressive considering most of them had undergone oxygen-efficient lung optimization. Jace coughed, choking slightly on compressed blueberry powder. That's very flattering, he said, clearing his throat with all the poise of a man trying not to die in front of an alien princess. But I think there's been some kind of cultural misunderstanding. I'm a communications officer, not a, what do you call it, betrothal candidate. No misunderstanding, she said, ears twitching. You handled the incident on Titan with wit and compassion. You saved that orphaned synthetic bird during the Psy-storm. You once told me my ears looked unreasonably majestic. These actions constitute sufficient courtship according to Erethian standards. Unreasonably majestic, he muttered, glancing around the table like a man begging for help from a room full of stunned fish. It was in a memo, she added. You sent it to Commander Roussel when requesting visual access to my species' audio receptors for translation algorithms. You included a parenthetical compliment. He put his head in his hands. That was sarcasm. We do not process sarcasm. Oh, of course you don't. Your rejection, if you choose to give one, she continued evenly, must be delivered formally and in front of a minimum of 12 witnesses. To reject the proposal protocol in private is considered cowardly and may result in poetic haunting. Jace lifted his head. Poetic, what now? Haunting, it's mostly symbolic, occasionally metaphysical. Involves metaphors about loneliness delivered during REM cycles. I'm going to be haunted by rhyming dreams if I don't marry you? Correct. I need a drink. The rest of the delegation had fallen into a stunned silence, which was a miracle given that most of them were genetically modified to talk during both inhalation and exhalation. Admiral Takashi gave Jace the look of a man who both feared and admired what was happening. Alara simply waited, perfectly still, as if this sort of thing happened all the time. And maybe it did. Maybe in the star-flung courts of the Erethians, proposals dropped like meteor showers, and no one had ever taught them the joy of a slow burn. Jace had dated women who'd taken 6 months just to hold hands. This one wanted to connect brainstems and share insurance policies. I don't think this is wise, he said at last, trying to inject diplomacy into his voice. Marrying me would be impossible. She tilted her head. Then let's do the impossible. Jace felt something shift. It wasn't the gravity, though Lunar Station Echo 9 was notorious for micro-tremors near the kitchen wing, but something else. Something in the air between them. She wasn't joking. She wasn't threatening. She was just certain. He cleared his throat. I should probably discuss this with Human Resources. I have already submitted the relevant forms. Of course you have. 2 hours later, Jace sat in the lunar cafeteria, staring into a nutrient shake that tasted faintly of regret. The room buzzed with subdued energy. News of the incident had spread fast, as gossip tends to do when it involves interspecies matrimony and a guy who once got rejected by a vending machine. Commander Roussel sat down across from him, holding a tray of suspiciously jiggling food cubes. So, she said, heard you got proposed to. Can we not? She's a catch, Marin. Those ears alone could get you an ambassadorial pension. I don't want to marry anyone with ears that majestic. That's too much pressure. What if I say something dumb and they wiggle with disappointment? She's hot, she's smart, and she doesn't laugh at your jokes out of pity. That's at least 3 points above your usual type. Jace rubbed his face. This isn't about attraction. It's about diplomacy. She's the face of a species that has quantum-level social etiquette. If I mess this up, we'll be lucky if they still sell us neutron batteries. Roussel sipped her synth coffee. You really think she's doing this for politics? I don't know. Maybe I'm just a curiosity. Or maybe this is how they prank people. I mean, she quoted my sarcasm back at me like it was scripture. Could be worse, Roussel said. Could have been a mating duel. You don't look good in ceremonial armor. I don't look good in anything that involves public rejection and psychic metaphors. Just then, Alara entered the room. Conversation stopped again. She wore a navy blue diplomatic robe, her ears tucked neatly into a ceremonial headband. She walked straight to Jace, nodded at Roussel, then addressed him calmly. I understand you are experiencing emotional turbulence. He looked up wearily. That's one way to put it. Erethian philosophy encourages shared turbulence. May I join you in bewilderment? He blinked. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Excellent. I will begin co-bewildering. She sat beside him. Roussel gave them both a long look and excused herself, muttering something about love being a weaponized virus. Jace tried not to stare at Alara's profile, the way her skin caught the overhead lights like a pale lavender moon, the curve of her ears shifting subtly as she listened. She was smiling, not smugly, not in triumph, but in quiet amusement. This isn't how things work where I'm from, he said finally. I know, she said. That is why I proposed. You fear impossibility. I find it exhilarating. I don't even know what I'd be agreeing to. Then we will learn. Together. He looked at her. Really looked. Past the ears and the politics and the gravity of it all. And he thought, maybe the impossible wasn't such a bad place to start. 2 weeks after the proposal protocol incident, as it was now referred to in both human and Erethian diplomatic logs, Jace Marin stood in front of his quarters on Mars Station Xylon, armed with a mop, a coffee the color of legal gray, and a carefully rehearsed internal speech about emotional boundaries. None of which prepared him for the moment his door slid open and revealed Alara Venn, sitting cross-legged on his bunk like she owned it, which, according to a technicality in the Eurasian Union Code, she did. "I have brought snacks," she said, holding up a bag of protein chips labeled Zorgon Fusion. Now with 90% less regret. Jace squinted. "How did you get in here?" "The door accepted my biometric signature." "You're not registered." I smiled at the sensor. "That shouldn't work. Your species builds doors with very low self-esteem." He sighed and tossed the mop into the corner like a soldier abandoning his last line of defense. "I moved here to get some space, ironically." "Yes," she said. "Mars has much space. The dust is magnificent." "That's not what I—" "Never mind. You followed me across the solar system. Do you know how stalkerish that is?" "I prefer the term persistent emissary with admirable romantic tenacity." He sat down in the one chair not covered in Erethian ceremonial ribbons. "Alara, I need to ask, why are you doing this?" "I have told you, you are statistically compatible. Also, you speak in riddles that cause enjoyable neurological confusion." "That's just sarcasm. Most people find it irritating." "I find it arousing." He choked on his coffee. Alara looked mildly concerned. "Do I need to summon medical attention?" "No," he wheezed. "Just maybe don't use the word arousing while I'm drinking anything ever again." "Noted." She popped a chip into her mouth and crunched loudly. "Also, your Earth love songs are terrible but strangely effective. I have created a playlist." He closed his eyes. "Oh no. It includes something called Total Eclipse of the Heart, which I believe is a warning about orbital instability." "That's not—" "Okay, you know what? Fine. Why exactly are you here?" She grew uncharacteristically serious. "Because my people believe this is wrong. Because your people believe this is ridiculous. And because when I told you we could do the impossible, you didn't laugh. You just looked scared. That means there is hope. I also looked scared when I saw a space roach in the lunar showers." "Yes, but you did not try to marry it." He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. The truth was, part of him had expected her to forget, to vanish into Erethian protocol, write off her boldness as a cultural hiccup. Instead, she was here, with snacks, and a terrible playlist, and eyes that somehow made Mars feel warmer. By the end of the week, their presence on Station Xylon was no longer considered odd. It was considered entertainment. "You two are like a sitcom," said Lieutenant Baco, the station's head of hydroponics, as he passed them in the corridor. "A deeply confusing interspecies sitcom." Jace rolled his eyes. "We're not a show." "You're literally being filmed," Baco said, pointing to the diplomatic drones hovering discreetly near the ceiling. Jace looked up. "Oh, for the love of gravity." Alara waved at the drone. "Hello, please capture my left side. It's more photogenic." The drone beeped affirmatively. They couldn't go anywhere without attention. Alara, with her flowing robes and philosophical sound bites, had become a sensation. Jace, meanwhile, found himself branded the accidental groom by the Galactic Daily Stream. There were memes. There was a hashtag. Someone had turned their initial argument into a synthwave remix that played in the Martian nightclubs. "Do you like this?" he asked her over a shared nutrient bowl one evening. "I like that you squint when confused and pretend it is due to ambient light." "I don't squint." "Okay, yeah, I do. But this is a circus. Your metaphor implies chaos. I see only adaptation and affection." He stared into the nutrient paste. "I should be filing reports, attending comms briefings, not figuring out how to say no without causing an interplanetary incident." "You have already said no, but your eyes have not." He looked at her. "That's unfair." "It is accurate." He tossed his spoon down and stood. "Fine, let's settle this. One date, just one. Not an Erethian ritual, not a political statement, just a human-style, low-pressure, entirely ill-advised date. If it goes terribly, you go back to diplomatic duties and I go back to pretending this never happened." Alara's ears twitched in what he had learned was her version of a grin. "Agreed. What is the customary human location for such an engagement?" "Someplace with lighting dim enough to hide regret." The Martian station had exactly one restaurant, creatively named EAT, ecosystem-approved taste. It served food cubes in romantic arrangements and played soft ambient music designed to stimulate non-aggressive hormonal spikes. They sat across from each other in a booth shaped like a clamshell. Jace wore his best shirt, which wasn't saying much, and Alara wore something that shimmered like melted starlight. The entire room paused to gawk, then awkwardly pretended not to. "This is weird," Jace said. "Yes," she replied. "I enjoy it." They ordered. The server, a nervous intern in a hover apron, took their order with the reverence usually reserved for royalty or minor demigods. Jace tried not to look at the hidden cameras. Alara tried to understand why Terran appetizers required bread. "Tell me something illogical," she said between bites of what might have been tofu. "My uncle once married a hologram," she blinked. "For companionship?" "Number tax purposes." She considered this. "That is very human." They ate in silence for a bit. The music shifted into something vaguely resembling jazz, but with more synthetic wobbling. "Do you actually think this could work?" he asked suddenly. Alara tilted her head. "Define this." "Us. Marriage. You giving up your whole life for whatever I am." She reached across the table, took his hand, casually like she'd done it 1,000 times in other timelines. "I am not giving up my life. I am choosing a path within it. You are strange, illogical, emotionally evasive, and prone to metaphors involving food. I don't do that. You once described your childhood trauma as overcooked spaghetti logic." He looked away. "Okay, maybe I do." She smiled. "You are not safe. You are not expected. That is why I choose you." He stared at her. The room, the music, the gawking, all of it faded. Just her hand, warm in his. Just that impossible sentence. And for a moment, Jace Marin, cynical, sarcastic, and perpetually overwhelmed, thought maybe, just maybe, the impossible didn't feel quite so far away. Jace was holding a form titled Declaration of Multi-Species Intent to Cohabit when he realized he'd made a terrible mistake. "You said it would be one date," he hissed at Alara as the Martian administrative officer beamed at them like a proud parent and handed over a stack of glowing paperwork. "One date, not whatever bureaucratic hell this is." She smiled with practiced innocence. "You said if it went terribly, we would part ways." "But it did not go terribly. You smiled 4 times, once with both eyes. That's called blinking." "False. I recorded your facial muscle tension. There was emotional warmth." I checked. He glanced at the form again. It asked if he had any experience with telepathic link surges, genetic drift exposure, or if he had ever been legally bound to a photosynthetic organism. "What happens if I just don't sign?" The officer behind the desk leaned in helpfully. "Then your application gets flagged as emotionally negligent under Erethian intercultural reciprocity protocols. It might trigger a sympathy audit." "I don't know what that is," Jace muttered. "Neither do we," said the officer. "But the last guy who refused was haunted by approval holograms for 6 months." "I'll just hold on to this," Jace said, backing away slowly. "Maybe use it as a placemat." Alara followed him out of the admin wing, her robes flowing with just enough sass to make him nervous. "You ambushed me," he said once they were clear of listening devices and auto-notary drones. "I optimized our legal efficiency. You used a date to trick me into paperwork. I brought dessert. That's not a defense." It was chocolate. "Okay, fine. Partial defense." They ended up in the station's rec dome, a large artificial park filled with imported moss, a badly maintained lake, and synthetic birds that chirped in 12-hour loops. Jace paced while Alara sat cross-legged on a floating meditation pad, looking for all the world like a goddess trying to figure out Earth taxes. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "This whole love thing, commitment, galactic attention? I'm more of a suffer quietly and make jokes kind of guy." "That is acceptable." He stopped pacing. "It is. Yes, but I will not allow you to suffer alone." "That's weirdly sweet." "It is scientifically sweet. I had your psychological profile reviewed by an empathy simulator. It registered high on the grumpy but loyal axis. You ran my psyche through an AI? Yes, it tried to flirt with me. I deleted it. He laughed, genuinely, for the first time all day. Great. Even the I can't resist you. That is not my fault. My ears are symmetrical. Jace sat beside her, the meditation pad adjusting under his weight with a judgmental hum. What happens if we go through with this? Alara was quiet for a moment. I will likely be disavowed by my family. My status on the Erethian High Assembly would be revoked. Your own government will likely conduct several awkward investigations into your motives, sanity, and libido. Libido? It was mentioned in the Cultural Assessment Survey. He groaned. Of course it was. But, she said, turning toward him, we would be a precedent, a test case, proof that something more than alliance treaties can exist between our species. Something irrational, something human. He looked at her, not at the politics or the risk, or the cameras that still occasionally buzz by pretending to be bees. Just her. That impossible certainty in her voice, that irritatingly beautiful confidence, and yes, the ears. I'm not sure if I can be that guy, he said. You already are, she replied. Later that night, Jace found himself back in his quarters, trying to fill out one of the simpler forms. Preliminary Compatibility Declaration Addendum, Form 19B, which asks things like, do you consent to non-invasive memory echo scans? And are you comfortable with being telepathically witnessed during arguments? He sighed and opened a private channel to Earth. His screen buzzed, then revealed the face of Dr. Kellen Sipes, a friend from his academy days and now a therapist specializing in quantum entanglement of the emotional kind. I need your brain, Jace said without preamble. You always do, Kellen replied, sipping something suspiciously green. Let me guess. Alien girl still wants to marry you. Public interest has reached chaos levels. And now you're wondering if you're having a midlife crisis 10 years early. Midlife crisis doesn't usually involve forms written in 6 languages, one of which vibrates. Fair. So you thinking of going through with it? I don't know. She's amazing. Terrifyingly amazing. She believes in something I don't even know how to name. Love? I was going to say impossible nonsense, but sure. Kellen leaned forward. Here's the thing. You've always been the guy who jokes about feelings instead of having them. And now for once, you're not running? That's not a crisis, Jace. That's growth. Ugh, gross. You'll survive. Maybe even be happy. Just don't fill out any vibrating forms without reading the fine print. 3 days later, Jace stood in a conference room lit like an interstellar spa, surrounded by officials from both worlds. The Unity Council had summoned them to conduct a voluntary yet heavily pressured interview to determine whether their relationship could serve as a model. Alara sat beside him, radiating composure. Jace was sweating through his undershirt. State your reasons for pursuing interspecies union, said the human delegate. Existential dare, Jace replied before Alara could open her mouth. Also, ears. Laughter. Even the Erethian observers twitched politely. Are you aware of the potential risks? I am. She listed them alphabetically over breakfast. Do you believe your bond is genuine? Jace looked at her. It scares me how much I believe that. Alara, for once, looked almost surprised. After a long pause, the chairperson nodded. Pending final review, we are willing to allow a conditional trial partnership with diplomatic safeguards. Alara turned to Jace and whispered, That means yes, he exhaled. Oh, thank gravity. That night, as the Martian sky simulated a twilight it had never earned, Jace and Alara stood on the observatory deck. 1,000 small lights blinked in orbit above them. Ships, satellites, surveillance drones. So, Jace said, we're officially, unofficially almost married. Progress, she replied. We should celebrate. I brought ice cream, she said, producing a tube labeled Cryo Choco 42. He laughed. You keep doing that? What? Making the impossible look easy. She handed him a spoon. Then help me make it permanent. The wedding planning began with a mistake and escalated into a diplomatic emergency by lunchtime. I said I wanted a small ceremony, Jace repeated, staring at the rapidly growing list of attendees projected across his retinal HUD. This list includes 4 planetary governors, a sentient fog, and something called the Minister of Universal Subtlety. Alara nodded, adjusting her ceremonial sleeve with practiced calm. He insists on attending, though he will likely be invisible. They? Of course, Jace rubbed his eyes. The room around him, technically the Mars Station Xylon Multicultural Briefing Theater, unofficially repurposed as Wedding HQ, was filled with a buzz of voices, data packets, and hover notaries. A group of Erethian monks floated in the corner, meditating on the concept of eternal union while playing slow-motion bagpipes. A Terran chef was arguing with a Martian nutrient engineer about cake density regulations. He turned to Alara. You said it would be simple. She gave him that infuriatingly serene look. Simplicity is a cultural construct. This is minimalist by Erethian standards. There's a holographic phoenix warming up backstage. It only ignites if the vows are sincere. Jace blinked. That might actually be useful. A junior coordinator floated past them on a hover disk, her face a hologram cycling between calm reassurance and mild panic. Excuse me, we're having a mild scheduling overlap between the vow procession and the cosmic unity drum circle. Also, the Venusian ambassador is allergic to starlight orchids, and the flower drones are ignoring allergy tags. Alara raised a hand. The coordinator stopped mid-glide. Reroute the orchids to the ornamental void trees. Move the drum circle to the zero-G mezzanine. Tell the ambassador we will provide photosensitive pollen dampeners. The coordinator blinked in gratitude and zipped away. Jace stared at her. You know you're terrifying, right? I know I am efficient. Same thing. By the next morning, the chaos had acquired sentience. The event had been picked up by every major galactic stream. A panel of experts had been assembled on the Saturnian news beacon to argue over the implications of their union. One commentator described it as a touching symbol of post-biological empathy, while another declared it the beginning of the interstellar emotional apocalypse. Jace tried to ignore it. He focused on writing his vows and failing. He wrote a heartfelt paragraph that sounded like an apology letter. Then he rewrote it into a series of metaphors involving oxygen scarcity, which made him sound vaguely threatening. Finally, he settled on a simple truth. I'm still scared, but I think the fear means something matters, and nothing's ever mattered more than this. It wasn't poetic, but it was real. He looked over at Alara, who was fine-tuning her vow delivery system, a micro-neural transmitter that would project her words directly into the audience's emotional centers. She caught his gaze and said, I considered composing a sonnet using Erethian harmonic syntax, but I chose a memory instead. Which one? The first time you laughed at something I said without understanding it. That doesn't narrow it down. Precisely. They sat in silence for a while, watching the Martian sun simulate a golden dawn. The air tasted like dry metal and anticipation. Jace cleared his throat. So what happens if something goes wrong? She glanced at him. Define wrong. Oh, I don't know. Maybe your High Council storms in, declares the whole thing invalid, and tries to separate us using a dimensional legal loop. That only happened once. I was being hypothetical. She took his hand. If something goes wrong, we will still be us. Maybe inconveniently, possibly illegally, but us. The ceremony began with gravity fluctuations. Technically, they were symbolic gravimetric pulses meant to represent the weight of commitment, but to the unprepared, it felt like standing on a trampoline being judged by ancestors. Jace stood at the center of the orbital chapel, a hollow dome orbiting just above Mars's upper atmosphere, dressed in formal Earth military diplomatic attire that itched and blinked in odd places. Alara wore a dress coated in bioluminescent threads that shimmered with her heart rate. The effect was dazzling, also slightly nauseating. Guests floated in concentric rings, officials, strangers, sentient clouds, and a few old friends. Russell waved at Jace from the second ring, giving him a thumbs up and mouthing "Don't faint." The efficient, an AI cluster named Unity Prime, began the ceremony in 3 languages and 1 mood tone. It hummed, it sparkled, and at one point it sang an operatic note that caused half the audience to blink out tears reflexively. Before we begin, Unity Prime intoned, are there any objections? A long silence. Then a holographic hand raised from the third ring. Jace groaned. You've got to be kidding me. The hologram solidified into an Erethian elder, cloaked in spirals of starlight and political authority. "I object," the elder declared. "This union threatens the sanctity of ancestral tradition and contradicts 3,000 cycles of cultural equilibrium." Elara stepped forward. "Elder Varn, you taught me the ethics of harmonious discord. This is discord, but it is also harmony. You would undo centuries of boundary with one act of emotion?" "Yes," she said, "because boundaries are not sacred. Love is." There was a pause. Varn's image flickered. Then with a reluctant nod, he vanished. The crowd exhaled. "Nice rebuttal," Jace whispered. "I rehearsed." Unity Prime resumed. "Then let the bonding proceed." Elara transmitted her memory, a quiet moment on the station, her watching Jace fall asleep over a datapad, his fingers still twitching from a dream. The audience gasped as the emotion swept through them. Affection, curiosity, warmth. Jace followed with his vow, speaking softly without tech. "I'm not perfect. I'm not logical. I don't even know how I ended up here. But every time I try to walk away, I look back, and you're still there, and I still want to try." The phoenix ignited, which meant the vows passed. Cheers erupted. The AI cried binary tears. Someone from Jupiter's moonhive launched celebratory pollen into the zero-G. Elara turned to Jace. "Now we're anomalously married." "That sounds about right." And in that strange chaotic orbit above the red dust of Mars, two people from different stars chose each other. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't have to. Jace Marin woke up married to an alien. Technically, he woke up to the faint chime of a Martian morning sim cycle and the smell of nutritional soy espresso. But the bigger truth hovered over him like an excited drone. He had married Elara Venn, a Rethian diplomat, cultural anomaly, and certified chaos in ceremonial robes. She sat cross-legged at the foot of their quarters, drinking tea that smelled faintly of citrus and theoretical math. Her ears twitched in rhythm with the environmental controls. "We are officially trending," she said, eyes on a translucent data scroll. "Several systems have declared us emotionally inspiring. Are we still considered legally married, or was that just a very elaborate media stunt?" She turned to him. "There was a brief petition from the Department of Interspecies Rationality to nullify our union, but it was overruled by the Galactic Council of Emotional Authenticity." "That's a thing?" "It is now." Jace sat up slowly. "So this is our life now. Public figures, cultural case study, possibly part of a romantic sitcom." "We're being pitched as a holodrama," she said. "Working title, Ear Me Out." He groaned into his hands. "Make it stop." "Too late. There is fan art." They both fell quiet for a moment, the soft hum of Mars Station humming beneath them like a contented beast. Then Jace said, "Are you sure you're okay with all this? The fame, the politics, the relentless Terran sarcasm?" "I am married to the universe's most emotionally repressed human. I find everything else manageable." They smiled at each other. It wasn't the wild cinematic grin of newlyweds in gravity-free bliss. It was smaller, warmer, earned. The months that followed blurred into something stranger than peace. Their union sparked policy debates, spontaneous musical numbers in Erethian universities, and a short-lived cult dedicated to emotion-first diplomacy. Station Xylon became a symbolic epicenter, hosting seminars with titles like Cross-Cultural Affection in the Age of Biosentient Regulation. Jace found himself drafted into lectures, interviews, and once, bizarrely, a holographic cooking competition against a Venusian chef who claimed love required more paprika. He gave up trying to escape the spotlight and instead learned to ride it with minimal existential screaming. "You've become adaptable," she said. "I've become a walking anomaly." "Same thing." They bumped gently into a kinetic sculpture of two spirals merging and shared a kiss that accidentally triggered an applause track embedded in the wall. Not everything was simple. There were hard days, moments of miscommunication, cultural weirdness, unexpected allergies. Jace once gave a toast at an Erethian dinner that, due to improper phrasing, was interpreted as a threat against 4 generations of ancestors. Elara once accidentally connected their neural links during a dream about Terran taxes. Jace screamed for 20 minutes. But they learned. They developed a system, color-coded emotion tags, shared memory vaults with password protection, and a rule about never discussing politics while orbiting Venus. And Jace changed. Not overnight, not in a montage, but slowly like a planet shifting orbit. He stopped hiding behind jokes. Well, most of the time. He listened more. He asked questions. He started writing again. Not reports or declarations, but letters. Long ones, sent into the void. He didn't know who they were for. Maybe no one. Maybe his old self. The one who thought love was dangerous. The one who believed he wasn't built for connection. He ended each letter the same way. Still scared. Still choosing her. 1 year after the wedding, they stood on a stage orbiting Europa. The crowd stretched in every direction. Diplomats, skeptics, artists, small robots holding signs that read, "Let love recode logic." Chase took the mic. It hovered obediently. He cleared his throat. People keep asking us what it means. This thing we did. This leap across biology and protocol insanity. They want a thesis, a model, a guidebook. He glanced at Alara, who gave him the nod that meant, just be weird and honest, it works. I don't have that, he said. I don't have a neat answer. I don't even have matching socks. But I know this. Every time I wanted to run, she stayed. Every time I got lost in what couldn't be, she made it a little more possible. A pause, a breath. So maybe that's all it is. Not fate, not politics. Just staying, choosing, over and over, even when it doesn't make sense. The silence that followed was soft, grateful, real. Then Alara stepped up and added, also, his cooking has improved. Laughter broke like starlight. Later, as they watched Europa's icy surface shift beneath the clouds, Jace leaned into her and whispered, "Do you regret it?" "No," she said. "Do you?" "I regret not doing it sooner." They held hands, not as a spectacle, not as a symbol, but as two people who had walked through absurdity and come out intact. Maybe not whole, but enough. And somewhere, far away, a new couple, Arethian, Terran, maybe neither, read their story and dared to imagine something impossible. And then they did it anyway.